He thought letting his little girl choose her new stepmother would be a harmless way to involve her, until she rejected every millionaire guest and picked the one woman no one expected. "I choose Lorraine." The words fell from 9-year-old Sienna Aldrin's lips so softly that at first, Preston thought he'd misheard her. Around the long mahogany dining table, the clink of silverware stopped. 5 impeccably dressed women froze mid-bite. Somewhere at the far end, a chair leg scraped against the polished hardwood floor. Preston's eyes shifted toward the woman standing near the doorway, Lorraine Baptiste, wearing her navy work uniform, holding a tray of coffee cups. Her brow furrowed slightly, as if she too couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Lorraine was the housekeeper. She wasn't even part of the selection. But Sienna didn't blink. She simply looked at her father, her small hands folded in her lap, her voice calm but certain. "She's already my mom," she repeated, and you could almost hear the air leave the room. One of the guests, a tall blonde in a pearl choker, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Another pressed her manicured fingers together, lips tightening. The other 3 stared at Sienna, some with disbelief, others with thinly veiled irritation. Preston's mind raced. This was supposed to be straightforward, a weekend to help Sienna warm up to the idea of him remarrying. 5 women he knew well enough to trust, women who had shown up in chauffeur-driven cars with boxes of delicate chocolates and flowers in colors meant to photograph well. And now, in one quiet sentence, his daughter had rewritten the ending. It hadn't always been like this. In fact, until 3 days ago, Preston thought he had the plan neatly laid out. 3 mornings earlier, the Aldrin estate in Council Bluffs, Iowa, had been a hive of preparation. The housekeepers polished silver that already gleamed, the gardeners clipped hedges into perfect lines, and a catering truck unloaded fresh seafood from Des Moines. Preston paced the length of the living room, phone pressed to his ear, confirming final details with his oldest friend. "It's just a weekend," he said. "She'll meet them, talk to them, maybe spend some time one-on-one. By Sunday night, she'll have a name, that's all." But "that's all" was never going to be that simple. Sienna had been quiet ever since her mother passed 3 years ago. Not withdrawn exactly. She still laughed when something truly amused her, but there was a cautiousness about her, as if she'd learned too early that people could disappear without warning. Preston thought letting her choose her future stepmother would give her a sense of control. Lorraine moved quietly around the edges of all this preparation, wiping down surfaces and checking that the guest rooms had fresh towels. She'd been in the Aldrin household since Sienna was 4, back when Preston and his late wife still argued over whether to send her to a private academy or keep her in public school. Lorraine had seen it all. The chaos, the celebrations, the nights when Sienna crawled into the kitchen just to sit while she baked cornbread. The first of the 5 women arrived on Friday afternoon in a gleaming black SUV. Preston stood at the front steps with Sienna at his side, trying to keep things light. "Remember," he whispered to her, "just talk to them. See how you feel." But Sienna didn't respond. Her gaze drifted to the far side of the driveway, where Lorraine was helping unload grocery bags from the catering van. Lorraine caught her eye and gave the faintest smile before disappearing into the kitchen. By Friday evening, all 5 guests were settled in. Each woman brought a different kind of charm. One laughed easily and told stories about her charity work. Another complimented Sienna's hair. Another tried to win her over with a designer doll. But it all felt staged, too polished. Sienna sat through the conversations politely, but her eyes often wandered to the kitchen doorway where Lorraine moved in and out, carrying plates, refilling glasses, never speaking unless spoken to. Preston noticed, but he told himself it was just habit. Sienna had always been close to Lorraine. This weekend was about broadening her view, but the weekend had only just begun, and already Sienna's focus was drifting far from the plan. By Saturday morning, the Aldrin estate had transformed into a stage. The 5 guests had settled into their respective rooms, each outfitted with fresh flowers and a view of the sprawling cornfields. Outside, a light breeze moved through the tall grass, carrying the faint scent of hay from the neighboring farm. Breakfast was set in the sunroom, a wide, glass-walled space overlooking the eastern pasture. Preston stood at the head of the table, coffee in hand, trying to project ease. Sienna sat to his left, her hair brushed smooth, wearing the blue cardigan her grandmother had sent last month. The guests entered one by one, each making a subtle performance of their arrival. First came Clarissa Beauchamp, a gallery owner from St. Louis, dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit with a silk scarf knotted at her neck. "Good morning, Mr. Aldrin," she said warmly, then turned to Sienna. "And hello to you, sweetheart. I hope you like the pastries I brought. They're from the best bakery in the city." She placed a gold-foiled box beside Sienna's plate before sitting. Next was Genevieve Rowland, whose family owned a chain of boutique hotels in Arizona. She swept in wearing a flowing floral dress and carried a bouquet of imported orchids. "For you, Sienna," she said, presenting the flowers like a trophy. "They'll brighten your room." Ivy Cranford followed, her diamond bracelet catching the sunlight. She spoke little at first, instead placing a hand gently on Sienna's shoulder in what seemed meant to be a maternal gesture. Then came Mireille Donovan, tall and graceful, her voice low and deliberate. She talked about her love for horseback riding, a detail Preston had casually mentioned to all of them beforehand. Last was Penelope Drayden, a philanthropist known for her bold opinions and expensive shoes. She strode in with a paper gift bag and produced a limited edition children's book, explaining it had been signed by the author. Sienna thanked them each with polite words, but Preston caught the way her eyes flickered toward the kitchen. Lorraine was there, wearing her navy uniform, sliding a tray of warm muffins onto the counter. She didn't insert herself into the gathering, but when Sienna excused herself to get a glass of water, she made a quick detour to whisper something to Lorraine that brought a smile to the girl's face. The morning passed in a carefully orchestrated series of activities, a tour of the stables, a walk around the pond, and a picnic under the shade of a sprawling oak. The women tried in different ways to engage Sienna. Clarissa asked about her favorite school subjects. Genevieve suggested they plan a trip together. Ivy complimented her cardigan. Mireille talked about the horses they might ride later. Penelope quizzed her about the book she was currently reading. Sienna responded, but only as much as politeness required. She didn't fidget or pout. She just seemed distant, as though she were somewhere else entirely. That somewhere else was often just a few feet away. Lorraine moved through the day quietly, but was always present, refilling lemonade pitchers during the picnic, adjusting the saddle before Sienna's brief horseback ride, brushing dirt from the hem of her dress when she tripped near the garden path. At lunch, Clarissa leaned toward Preston while Sienna was distracted with her sandwich. "She's shy, isn't she?" Preston smiled faintly. "She's careful with people." Clarissa nodded, though there was a trace of calculation in her eyes. The afternoon brought a bit more openness from Sienna, but only when Lorraine was around. While the women lounged in wicker chairs after lunch, Sienna wandered into the kitchen, where Lorraine was preparing fruit skewers for the evening appetizer spread. "Can I help?" Sienna asked. Lorraine glanced down. "Sure, honey. Grab that melon baller for me." They worked side by side, Sienna carefully placing the melon balls onto skewers. She was relaxed here, talking freely about her art project at school, a funny thing her classmate had said, and how she hated the smell of the perfume one of the guests was wearing. Back in the sunroom, Mireille was telling a story about a charity auction she'd attended, but Preston's attention kept snagging on the sight of Sienna through the kitchen doorway, laughing quietly with Lorraine. Dinner that night was meant to be the first real impression meal. Fine china, multiple courses, and carefully chosen background music. The guests dressed for the occasion, each more polished than the next. Sienna sat politely, answering questions, but as dessert arrived, a rich chocolate torte, she excused herself to fetch something from her room. Minutes later, she returned carrying a drawing, a quick sketch she'd made that afternoon of Lorraine in the garden, holding a basket of vegetables. She placed it beside her plate without a word, then returned to eating. But the drawing didn't go unnoticed, and a quiet ripple of tension began threading its way through the table. By Sunday morning, the polished shine of the weekend had started to wear thin. The guests were still impeccably dressed and gracious, but small cracks were beginning to show. Their conversations with Sienna became more pointed, less casual. It was clear they were all aware this was the final day, their last chance to make an impression. Sienna had noticed it too. She'd never been good at pretending she didn't see things. She picked up on the way Clarissa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when Lorraine entered the room. She caught the faint sigh Genevieve gave when Preston excused himself to take a call, leaving her alone with Sienna. She even saw Ivy roll her eyes when Mireille mentioned the horses again. To most adults, these would have been subtle, forgettable moments. But to Sienna, they were loud. At breakfast, Penelope tried again to strike up a conversation. "So, Sienna, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go?" Sienna shrugged, cutting her pancake. "Not sure." How about Paris? Penelope pressed. We could shop, eat at fancy cafes. Lorraine passed by at that moment, setting down a fresh pitcher of orange juice. Without missing a beat, Sienna said, I think I'd rather stay here. Penelope blinked, then gave a short laugh as if she'd heard a joke she didn't quite get. The rest of the morning was packed with planned activities. Preston had arranged for a small art session on the back patio, hoping to appeal to Sienna's love for drawing. The guests took turns sitting beside her, praising her sketches. But Sienna's drawings were telling. While she sketched each woman briefly, she lingered the longest over a quick portrait of Lorraine arranging flowers in a vase. During a mid-morning break, Sienna wandered to the stables. Lorraine was there, talking quietly with the stable hand about feed deliveries. Sienna leaned against the stall door. They keep asking me questions, she said. Lorraine gave her a knowing look. And you don't want to answer? I just don't think they care what I say. I think they care what my dad thinks. Lorraine set down the bucket she was holding. Well, you don't have to say more than you want to. Sometimes listening tells you more than talking. Sienna thought about that. She didn't mind being around people, but she hated feeling like someone was pretending with her. And all weekend, she'd felt like she was being managed. Everyone was performing, except Lorraine. Later that afternoon, Preston organized a group walk around the property. The guests tried again to connect. Genevieve told Sienna about her time in ballet. Clarissa pointed out the architecture of the barn. Mireille asked if she liked horseback riding lessons. Sienna answered politely but briefly. When the group stopped by the vegetable garden, Lorraine was already there, trimming the tops off carrots. Sienna stepped away from the guests and joined her without a word, crouching to help. Genevieve's voice floated over from the path. Sienna, you'll get dirt on your dress. It's fine, Sienna called back, brushing soil from her hands. She glanced at Lorraine. We can wash it later, right? Of course, Lorraine replied, smiling faintly. Back in the house, tensions simmered. Mireille cornered Preston in the hallway. She barely talks to us. I'm not sure she's engaging with the process. It's not a process, Preston said, his tone polite but clipped. It's just her getting to know people. Mireille's brows lifted slightly, but she let it drop. That evening, before the final dinner, Sienna sat in her room. The sun was dipping low, spilling orange light across her desk. She could hear faint laughter from downstairs, the guests enjoying pre-dinner drinks. Lorraine knocked lightly and stepped in. You okay? She asked. Sienna nodded. They all want to be my mom, but they don't even know me. Lorraine sat on the edge of the bed. And what do you think makes someone a mom? Sienna thought for a long moment. Someone who remembers the things I like. Someone who's here when I wake up from a nightmare. Someone who doesn't leave. Lorraine didn't respond right away. She just smoothed a wrinkle in the bedspread. Sienna looked up at her. I already have one. But the night wasn't over yet, and the final dinner would turn that quiet certainty into a public decision no one in the room was prepared for. Lorraine Baptiste had never been one to step into the spotlight. Her work was meant to be invisible. The polished table before guests arrived, the steaming plates placed gently in front of them, the kitchen restored to order by the time dessert was over. But over the years, her presence in the Aldrin home had seeped into the quiet spaces of Sienna's life. On the surface, she was the housekeeper, but she had been there for more than just chores. She'd braided Sienna's hair before school recitals, ironed Preston's shirts before business dinners, and sat in the laundry room with the hum of the dryer masking a child's tears after a rough day. That weekend, Lorraine did what she always did. She worked. She laid out fresh linens for the guest rooms, polished the silver, made sure the horses had their evening feed. But everywhere she went, Sienna followed with her eyes. Saturday night, after the guests had retired to their rooms, Sienna slipped quietly into the kitchen. Lorraine was stacking clean plates. Do you get tired of doing all this? Sienna asked, leaning on the counter. Lorraine gave a soft laugh. Everybody gets tired sometimes, but I like knowing I'm taking care of people. You take care of me, Sienna said matter-of-factly. Lorraine hesitated for just a second, then nodded. I do. The next morning, while Preston took the guests on a short drive to show them the neighboring farmland, Lorraine stayed behind to prepare lunch. Sienna stayed with her. They moved around the kitchen easily. Lorraine slicing tomatoes, Sienna rinsing lettuce leaves. You're not like them, Sienna said suddenly. Like who? Lorraine asked without looking up. The ladies downstairs. They smile at me, but it's not real. You're real. Lorraine's hands stilled for a moment on the cutting board. She didn't press Sienna for more. She knew when to let a child's words sit. By the time the guests returned, the kitchen smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread. Lorraine wiped her hands on a towel and stepped back into the background, letting Preston usher everyone into the dining room. During lunch, Sienna was quiet again, but each time Lorraine entered with another dish, Sienna's gaze followed her. Preston noticed. He caught the faint smile that tugged at the corner of his daughter's mouth when Lorraine poured her water or quietly set a napkin by her plate. In the afternoon, Preston suggested a short break before the final dinner. The guests went to their rooms to rest or freshen up. Sienna wandered to the laundry room, where Lorraine was folding sheets. "Why don't you want to be part of it?" Sienna asked, sitting on the dryer. "Part of what?" Lorraine asked. "The choosing." Lorraine folded a pillowcase and placed it on the stack. "Because it's not my place. Your dad has his reasons for inviting those women." "But if I wanted you to be my mom, it could be your place," Sienna said, almost defiantly. Lorraine paused, her hands resting on the fabric. "Sometimes life doesn't work the way we think it should, but that doesn't change what's already true between people." That answer seemed to settle something in Sienna's mind. She slid off the dryer and hugged Lorraine around the waist before leaving the room. That evening, as the guests mingled in the living room before dinner, Lorraine moved between them with quiet efficiency, topping off drinks, offering hors d'oeuvres, checking that the dining table was set just right. She caught snippets of conversation, Penelope remarking on how Sienna seemed a bit closed off, Clarissa wondering aloud if the girl has any sense of the opportunity she's being given. Lorraine didn't react outwardly, but her eyes found Sienna across the room, sitting in an armchair with her knees pulled up, a small, knowing smile on her face. When Preston called everyone to the table, Lorraine was already in the dining room, lighting the last of the candles. She moved to the far corner, tray in hand, ready to serve the soup course. She didn't expect to be part of anything beyond that. But in less than an hour, the girl she'd helped raise was going to pull her out of the corner and into the center of a decision that would upend the entire weekend. The tension started before anyone had even sat down for the final dinner. Preston could feel it in the way the guests carried themselves, more deliberate, more aware that this was their last chance to win Sienna over. Conversations were polished to perfection, smiles held a beat too long, compliments fell like carefully placed stepping stones. Sienna noticed it too. She wasn't sure if it was because she'd been thinking about Lorraine all day or because she just couldn't see herself calling any of these women Mom. But every interaction felt heavier than it had on Friday. The meal began with a leek and potato soup, served in delicate porcelain bowls. Preston tried to keep the mood light, asking about everyone's travels or mutual acquaintances, but the rhythm kept breaking. Each guest seemed intent on subtly making their case. Clarissa leaned across the table slightly. "Sienna, if we lived together, I could take you to every art gallery in the region. You'd have a whole room for your drawings." Genevieve followed with, "And I'd love to teach you how to cook French pastries. We could spend afternoons baking together." Sienna stirred her soup, offering polite nods. She didn't meet their eyes. When the main course arrived, roast beef with seasonal vegetables, Moreo tried another approach. "Your father mentioned you like riding. I have a mare I think you'd love. She's gentle, beautiful. You could come with me to the stables any time." Across the table, Penelope smiled sweetly. "And if you ever wanted to travel, I could show you the world. There's so much out there to see." Sienna's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She glanced toward the far corner of the room where Lorraine was standing, quietly observing. Lorraine gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then it happened. Genevieve, in the middle of describing a summer villa her family owned, waved her hand dismissively toward Lorraine. "Of course, we'd have proper staff. People to handle everything so you wouldn't have to lift a finger. Not like here, where..." She trailed off, as if realizing too late that the room had gone still. Sienna set her fork down. "What's wrong with here?" Genevieve blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, nothing at all, darling. I just mean..." "Lorraine takes care of everything," Sienna said, her voice firm. "She makes this house work." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Preston cleared his throat, attempting to steer the conversation back, but the mood had shifted. The exchange had made something clear, at least to Sienna. After dinner plates were cleared, dessert arrived, a lemon tart Lorraine had baked herself. Sienna's face lit up when she saw it. "This is my favorite," she said, looking toward Lorraine. "Glad to hear it, sugar." Lorraine replied from her quiet post at the side of the room. As the last bites were taken, Preston set his glass down and leaned forward. Well, I suppose now's the time. Sienna, have you thought about who you'd like me to get to know better? The room seemed to shrink. All eyes turned to the girl at the end of the table. Sienna sat up straighter. She looked at each woman in turn. Clarissa, Genevieve, Ivy, Mireille, Penelope. Then she turned her head toward Lorraine, who stood still, tray in hand, eyes wide. I choose Lorraine, Sienna said simply. The air went taut. One of the guests exhaled sharply. Another shifted in her seat, staring down at her plate. Preston opened his mouth, then closed it again. Sienna, Lorraine wasn't... She's already my mom, Sienna interrupted. Lorraine's eyes flickered with surprise, then something softer, a mix of pride and disbelief. But the shock at that table was only the beginning. By the next day, the choice would ripple far beyond the walls of the Aldrin estate. For a long moment, the only sounds in the dining room were the faint crackle from the fireplace and the quiet ticking of the clock above the sideboard. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Sienna, her small frame sitting upright in her chair, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Preston's first instinct was to smooth it over, to thank the guests for their time, to gently redirect Sienna toward the intended choices. But something about the certainty in her voice made him pause. She wasn't being defiant. She wasn't even being dramatic. She was simply telling the truth as she saw it. Clarissa was the first to break the silence. That's sweet, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But Lorraine isn't... She is, Sienna interrupted, her tone steady. She's here every day. She knows what I like for breakfast. She listens when I talk. She was the one who stayed with me when I had the flu last winter. Lorraine shifted her weight slightly, her tray still in her hands. Sienna, she began, her voice low, but the girl turned toward her. You've been my mom since I was 4, Sienna said. We just didn't call it that. Across the table, Genevieve let out a quiet sigh, setting her wineglass down. It's not really how these things work, darling. Preston felt a flicker of irritation. Maybe it should be, he said before he could stop himself. That earned him a few startled looks, but he didn't care. He glanced toward Lorraine, who seemed frozen between wanting to defend herself and wanting to disappear entirely. Ivy, ever the diplomat, leaned forward slightly. Preston, I think we all respect Lorraine's role in the household, but it's not a role, Sienna said quickly. It's my life. The bluntness of her words silenced Ivy mid-sentence. Preston could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. What had been a cordial, if competitive, gathering was now a standoff between expectation and truth. Lorraine finally set her tray down on the sideboard and stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Sienna, I'm honored you feel that way, but this is your father's decision. Preston looked at her. No, he said quietly. I told her it was hers. The truth of that landed heavily. Penelope cleared her throat. Well, I suppose we've all been wasting our time then. She dabbed at the corners of her mouth with her napkin and placed it neatly on her plate. Not wasting, Preston said evenly, but maybe learning something important. The tension was thick enough to cut. Mireille pushed back her chair, clearly done with the evening's charade. Clarissa followed suit, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood as she left the room. One by one, the women excused themselves, offering polite goodnights that were more formality than sincerity. Within minutes, it was just Preston, Sienna, and Lorraine in the dining room. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter. You're sure? He asked. Sienna nodded without hesitation. You asked me to choose. I did. He turned to Lorraine. And you? What do you think? Lorraine's eyes met his, steady but uncertain. I didn't see this coming, but I can't pretend I don't love her like my own. That was enough for Preston. He reached for Sienna's hand, and with his other hand, he gestured for Lorraine to join them. She hesitated, then crossed the room, taking the seat beside Sienna. The three of them sat there for a while. No grand speeches, no formal declarations. Just a quiet understanding settling into place. But by the time morning came, that quiet understanding would be tested, because the outside world had a way of turning private choices into public controversy. By Monday morning, the estate was unusually still. The 5 women had left early, each departure marked by polite goodbyes that carried the weight of unfinished sentences. The driveway that had been lined with luxury cars 2 days earlier now sat empty, save for Preston's truck and Lorraine's modest sedan. Preston brewed coffee in the kitchen while Sienna sat at the counter eating toast. Lorraine moved about quietly, gathering the breakfast dishes, as if trying to make the day feel as ordinary as possible. But it wasn't. The phone calls began before noon. A cousin in Omaha called to ask if the rumor was true. A longtime business associate in Des Moines texted a link to a Facebook post where someone claimed Preston's daughter had chosen the housekeeper over eligible women from the top tier of society. By mid-afternoon, the story had reached local news blogs, the kind that thrived on gossip disguised as lifestyle reporting. The headline on one read, "Billionaire's daughter chooses housekeeper as new mom." By evening, it had spread to social media in 100 different versions. Some praised the choice as heartfelt and pure. Others criticized it as irresponsible or inappropriate. The comments section was a battlefield, strangers arguing about a family they'd never met. In the middle of it all, Preston kept the television off and focused on his daughter. "You okay with people talking?" he asked as they sat on the back porch that night. Sienna nodded. "They don't know us." Lorraine joined them with 3 mugs of hot chocolate. She didn't say much at first, just sat and watched the light fade over the fields. Finally, she spoke. "People will always have opinions. What matters is how we treat each other here, in this house." Sienna leaned against her. "I don't care what they say. I just wanted to pick someone who wouldn't leave." That hit Preston harder than any headline. His wife's absence had left a hole neither of them liked to talk about. But here was his daughter, filling that silence with an unshakable choice. Over the next week, Preston heard the whispers in country clubs and business dinners. Some men smirked and called it a stunt. Others offered awkward congratulations. A few admitted they admired him for respecting his daughter's wishes. Through it all, Lorraine remained steady. She kept doing her job, though now every movement seemed to be watched more closely by outsiders who had suddenly decided her life was a topic of interest. One evening, after Sienna had gone to bed, Preston found Lorraine in the kitchen folding laundry. "I know you didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "but I also know you can't tell a child who they feel safe with." He nodded. "I think I was looking for someone who could make my life easier. Sienna was looking for someone who could make her life whole again." Lorraine looked down at the shirt she was folding. "And now? Now I'm realizing she was right. The months ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be more questions, more judgment from people who saw the decision only through the lens of class and appearance. But for Preston, the choice had stripped away all the noise. One Saturday morning, as the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, Lorraine reading the paper, Preston sipping coffee, Sienna sketching, Preston realized it wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about recognizing the family they already were. "You know," he said, "people think love's about big gestures, but it's really about the little things you do over and over, every day." Sienna grinned. "Like remembering I like the crust cut off my sandwiches." "Exactly," Preston said. Lorraine smiled, but didn't look up from her paper, and that's why the little things matter more than all the grand promises in the world. For Preston, that was the lesson he hadn't seen coming. That sometimes the most important choice is the one that seems too simple to be worth noticing. If you've been holding back from telling someone what they mean to you, maybe today's the day. Because in the end, the family we choose, and the ones who choose us, are worth more than anyone else's approval. So if you believe in putting love and loyalty above appearances, don't just agree quietly. Share it, live it, and let the people in your life know exactly where they stand.